Hey, what's good, YouTube? This is Who Is Like God. In this video, we're going to be continuing our Leviticus study after some time. We're going to be reading Leviticus chapter 13 because we covered Leviticus 11 to 12 in the last episode. And we're just going to go through the book of Leviticus and study it and study the law and finish it out. And our next study series is probably going to be the book of Kings or Los Reyes. So with that being said, Leviticus 13 are the laws given to the ancient Hebrews about leprosy. So starting at verse 1, the Lord, the Most High, spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, when a person has on the skin of his body a swelling or an eruption or a spot, and it turns into a case of leprous disease on the skin of his body, then he shall be brought to Aaron the priest or to one of his sons the priests, and the priest shall examine the diseased area on the skin of his body. And if the hair in the diseased area has turned white, and the disease appears to be deeper than the skin of his body, it is a case of leprous disease. When the priest has examined him, he shall pronounce him unclean. So there's certain there's a certain kind of like medical vet to see if it really is leprosy or not. If the person is indeed leprous, then they will be deemed unclean by the priesthood, which would be Aaron and his sons. Verse 4. But if the spot is white in the skin of his body and appears no deeper than the skin, and the hair in it has not turned white, the priest shall shut up the diseased person for 7 days. And the priest shall examine him on the 7th day, and if in his eyes the disease is checked, and the disease has not spread in the skin, then the priest shall shut him up for another 7 days. And the priest shall examine him again on the 7th day, and if the disease area has faded and the disease has not spread in the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him clean. It is only an eruption, and he shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the eruption spreads in the skin after he has shown himself to the priest for his cleansing, he shall appear again before the priest. And the priest shall look, and if the eruption has spread into the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprous disease. So all different commandments and the different things pertaining to if you did have leprosy, what you would do, and about how the priest would try to discern if it was actually leprosy or not, and how you would be sort of shut up for windows of 7 days at a time to discern if it had spread or if it really was leprosy or not, or rather if the disease has faded. Verse 9, when a man is afflicted with a leprous disease, he shall be brought to the priest, and the priest shall look, and if there is a white swelling in the skin that has turned the hair white, and there is raw flesh in the swelling, it is a chronic leprous disease in the skin of his body, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. He shall not shut him up, for he is unclean. And if the leprous disease breaks out in the skin, so that the leprous disease covers all the skin of the diseased person from head to foot, so far as the priest can see, then the priest shall look, and if the leprous disease has covered all his body, he shall pronounce him clean of the disease. It has all turned white, and he is clean. But when raw flesh appears on him, he shall be unclean. And the priest shall examine the raw flesh and pronounce him unclean. Raw flesh is unclean, for it is a leprous disease. But if the raw flesh recovers and turns white again, then he shall come to the priest, and the priest shall examine him. And if the disease has turned white, then the priest shall pronounce the diseased person clean. He is clean. Verse 18. If there is in the skin of one's body a boil and it heals, and in the place of the boil there comes a white swelling or a reddish white spot, then it shall be shown to the priest. And the priest shall look, and if it appears deeper than the skin, and his hair has turned white, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. This is a case of leprous disease that has broken out in the boil. But if the priest examines it, and there is no white hair in it, and it is not deeper than the skin, but has faded, then the priest shall shut him up for 7 days. And if it spreads in the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a disease. But if the spot remains in one place and does not spread, it is the scar of the boil, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. Or when the body has a burn on its skin, and the raw flesh of the burn becomes a spot, reddish white or white, the priest shall examine it, and if the hair in the spot has turned white and it appears deeper than the skin, then it is a leprous disease. It has broken out in the burn, and the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a case of leprous disease. But if the priest examines it, and there is no white hair in the spot, and it is no deeper than the skin, but has faded, the priest shall shut him up 7 days, and the priest shall examine him the 7th day. If it is spreading in the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a case of leprous disease. But if the spot remains in one place and does not spread in the skin, but has faded, it is a swelling from the burn, and the priest shall pronounce him clean, for it is the scar of the burn. So here are different procedures to discern if certain things are leprosy or not, and what to do if it is leprosy. Verse 29, when a man or woman has the disease on the head or the beard, the priest shall examine the disease. And if it appears deeper than the skin, and the hair in it is yellow and thin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is an itch, a leprous disease of the head or the beard. And if the priest examines the itching disease, and it appears no deeper than the skin, and there is no black hair in it, then the priest shall shut up the person with the itching disease for 7 days. And the 7th day the priest shall examine the disease. If the itch has not spread, and there is in it no yellow hair, and the itch appears to be no deeper than the skin, then he shall shave himself, but the itch he shall not shave. And the priest shall shut up the person with the itching disease for another 7 days. And on the 7th day the priest shall examine the itch, and if the itch has not spread in the skin, and it appears to be no deeper than the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him clean. And he shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the itch spreads in the skin after his cleansing, then the priest shall examine him. And if the itch has spread in the skin, the priest need not seek for the yellow hair. He is unclean. But if in his eyes the itch is unchanged, and the black hair has grown in it, then the itch is healed and he is clean, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. When a man or a woman has spots on the skin of the body, white spots, the priest shall look, and if the spots on the skin of the body are of a dull white, it is leukoderma that is broken out in the skin, he is clean. If a man's hair falls out of his beard, he is bald, he is clean. And if a man's hair falls out from his forehead, he has baldness of the forehead, he is clean. But if there is on the bald head or on the bald forehead a reddish white diseased area, it is a leprous disease breaking out on his bald head or his bald forehead. Then the priest shall examine him, and if the disease swelling is reddish white on his bald head or on his bald forehead, like the appearance of leprous disease in the skin of the body, he is a leprous man, he is unclean. The priest must pronounce him unclean, his disease is on his head. So now, if trying to discern if you're leprous on your head or in the area of your beard or your forehead, versus if you're just losing hair. So basic idea of Leviticus 13 is all these different situations, trying to figure out if it's some natural sort of thing or if it's leprosy. Not that leprosy is necessarily unnatural, but trying to discern that. And then if you do have leprosy, the procedures that would make you unclean and isolated in that window of time. Verse 45, the leprous person who has the disease shall wear torn clothes and let the hair of his head hang loose, and he shall cover his upper lip and cry out, unclean, unclean. He shall remain unclean as long as he has the disease. He is unclean, he shall live alone. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. So that's sort of like a big point for everything that we're reading, is that we're getting all these different situations to figure out if someone is unclean. If they are unclean, they were expected to live outside of the camp so as to, I think, not contaminate the rest of the children of Israel. Verse 47, when there is a case of leprous disease in a garment, whether a woolen or linen garment, in warp or woof of linen or wool, or in the skin of in anything made of skin, if the disease is greenish or reddish in the garment, or in the skin of in the warp or the woof, or any article made of skin, it is a case of leprous disease, and it shall be shown to the priest. And the priest shall examine the disease and shut up that which he has the disease for 7 days. Then he shall examine the disease on the 7th day. If the disease has spread in the garment, it is the warp in the warp or the wool, in the warp or the woof, or in the skin, whatever be the use of the skin, the disease is a persistent leprous disease, it is unclean. And he shall burn the garment, or the warp or the woof, the wool or the linen, or any article made of a skin that is diseased, for it is a persistent leprous disease, it shall be burned in the fire. And if the priest examines, and if the disease has not spread in the garment, and the warp or the woof, or in any article made of skin, then the priest shall command that they wash the thing in which is the disease, and he shall shut it up for another 7 days. And the priest shall examine the diseased thing after it has been washed. And if the appearance of the diseased area has not changed, though the disease has not spread, it is still unclean. You shall burn it in the fire, whether the rot is on the back or on the front. But if the priest examines, and if the diseased area has faded after it has been washed, he shall tear it out of the garment or the skin or the warp or the woof. And if and if it appears again in the garment, in the warp or the woof, or in any article made of skin, it is spreading. You shall burn with fire whatever has the disease. But the garment, or the warp or the woof, or any article made of skin from which the disease departs when you have washed it, shall then be washed a second time and be clean. This is a law for a case of leprous disease in a garment of wool or linen, either in the warp or the woof, or in any article made of skin, to determine whether it is clean or unclean. So there, that verse 59 summarizes the last section about the leprosy laws concerning the test to figure out if garments were leprous. So in the latest verses, you would wash it. You would figure it out if it appears again, even after getting washed, the leprosy, then it means it's spreading, and then you would burn it. But if not, after washing it the first time and it was okay, then you would wash it a second time and it would be clean. It'd be clean. Now, the other layer I want to emphasize is, I think there's very practical health implications in this. Obviously, like, we can read these things and see how God is preserving his people when there's laws that would sort of give them discernment medically and isolating yourself when you're leprous. But on the other hand, this shows us that inanimate objects can be clean or unclean, which ultimately shows us that the cleanliness and cleanliness in the law refers to ceremonial stuff, because garments and objects and things that you put on yourself to hide your nakedness don't have the capacity to feel good or evil, or to do good or evil. So if even they can be clean or unclean, just like we can be clean or unclean, that refers to a sort of ceremonial cleanliness or uncleanliness in relation to God's covenant, God's legal covenant with the Israelites. It doesn't necessarily have to do with moral or being immoral, especially when you're dealing with things many times that we can't necessarily control, because like we'll read in later chapters, you would be unclean after certain sexual emissions or after releasing certain fluids, which is a natural part of the human experience. So that doesn't necessarily mean you're immoral, but it reflects how ultimately how human we are and how other God is, when these laws that show how unclean we are come many times from the perspective of things that are just natural in our experience. So in many ways, we get prepared for the holiness of God. All right. Now, after looking a little bit ahead, y'all, I'm going to read the first part of chapter 14. It goes hand in hand because we learned about the laws for leprosy. Now we're going to get into the laws pertaining to cleansing lepers. But chapter 14 is also a pretty long chapter. The second half has to do with cleansing houses that have leprosy, which is interesting. So what I'm going to do is I'll stop there. I'll read about the laws for cleansing lepers, and then the part about houses, cleansing houses, as well as bodily discharges, which is chapter 15, will be the next Leviticus study. But starting here with chapter 14, the first section. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "This shall be the law of the leprous person for the day of his cleansing. It shall be brought to the priest, and the priest shall go out of the camp, and the priest shall look. Then, if the case of leprous disease is healed in the leprous person, the priest shall command them to take for him who is to be cleansed 2 live clean birds, and cedar wood, and scarlet yarn, and hyssop. And the priest shall command them to kill one of the birds in the earthenware vessel over fresh water. He shall take the live bird with the cedar wood, and the scarlet yarn, and the hyssop, and dip them and the live bird in the blood of the bird that was killed over the fresh water. And he shall sprinkle it 7 times on him who is to be cleansed of the leprous disease. Then he shall pronounce him clean, and shall let the living bird go into the open field. And he who is to be cleansed shall wash his clothes, and shave off all his hair, and bathe himself in water, and he shall be clean. And after that he may come into the camp, but live outside his tent 7 days. And on the 7th day he shall shave off all his hair from his head, his beard, and his eyebrows. He shall shave off all his hair, and then he shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and he shall be clean." So if someone is actually unclean, legitimately unclean, like Leviticus 13 gives us the different tests to vet, well, here's the procedure. I actually forgot that ritual where they would kill one bird and then dip the over fresh water, and then dip the live bird in the blood of the deceased bird, and then sprinkle it 7 times. Again, we have that number 7 appearing throughout the scriptures. First in Genesis 2, as God rests on the 7th day, 7 becomes the cornerstone for the Sabbath. And then we have it various rituals of the law of God. So 7 is a very significant biblical number, and it's interesting that it's 7 times sprinkling of the blood that would turn a leper from being uncleansed to being cleansed. I think there's a lot to be said there from an allegorical perspective. Just understanding how Christ is prefigured in the law, the prophets, and the Psalms, as he says in the Gospel of Luke, San Lucas. I think there's something to be said about how, in terms of our moral health, we're all leprous, we're all unclean, we're all diseased. Our righteous works are like menstrual rags, like the book of Isaiah says. So in that sense, I can see how we're all spiritually leprous, and just like the sprinkling of the blood 7 times would restore them, so the sprinkling of the blood of Christ would restore us. Isaiah 52 verses 13 to 15 make that very clear about the sprinkling of the blood, which would restore not only the children of Israel, but these kings who had no relationship with the God of Israel would be sprinkled by the servant's blood. So just thinking about how Christ's sprinkling of his blood really cleansed us from our leprosy, so to speak. I think that's a very beautiful way we're just trying to be honest and objective and understanding the different parameters of the Old Testament and New Testament. We could almost sort of see how Christ is in the law. Verse 10, and on the 8th day he shall take 2 male lambs without blemish, and 1 ewe lamb, a year old without blemish, and a grain offering of 3/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil, and 1 log of oil. And the priest who cleanses him shall set the man who was to be cleansed and these things before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And the priest shall take 1 of the male lambs and offer it for a guilt offering, along with a log of oil, and wave them for a wave offering before the Lord. And he shall kill the lamb in the place where they kill the sin offering, on the burnt offering, in the place of the sanctuary. For the guilt offering, like the sin offering, belongs to the priest. It is most holy. The priest shall take some of the blood of the guilt offering, and the priest shall put it on the lobe of the right ear of him who is to be cleansed, and on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. Then the priest shall take some of the log of oil, and pour it into the palm of his own left hand, and dip his right finger in the oil that is in his left hand, and sprinkle some over this finger 7 times before the Lord. And some of the oil that remains in hand the priest shall put on the lobe of the right ear of him who is to be cleansed, and on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot, on top of the blood of the guilt offering. And the rest of the oil that is in the priest's hand he shall put on the head of him who is to be cleansed. Then the priest shall make atonement for him before the Lord. The priest shall offer the sin offering to make atonement for him who is to be cleansed from his uncleanness. And afterward he shall kill the burnt offering. And the priest shall offer the burnt offering and the grain offering on the altar. Thus the priest shall make atonement for him, and he shall be clean. Verse 21. But if he is poor and cannot afford so much, then he shall take 1 male lamb from a guilt offering for a guilt offering to be waved, to make atonement for him, and 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil for a grain offering, and a log of oil, also 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, whichever he can afford. The one shall be a sin offering, and the other a burnt offering. And on the 8th day he shall bring them for his cleansing to the priest, to the entrance of the tent of meeting before the Lord. And the priest shall take the lamb of the guilt offering and the log of oil, and the priest shall wave them for a wave offering before the Lord. And he shall kill the lamb of the guilt offering. And the priest shall take some of the blood of the guilt offering and put it on the lobe of the right ear of him who is to be cleansed, and on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. And the priest shall pour some of the oil into the palm of his own left hand, and shall sprinkle with his right finger some of the oil that is in his left hand 7 times before the Lord. And the priest shall put some of the oil that is in his hand on the lobe of his right ear of him who is to be cleansed, and on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot, in the place where the blood of the guilt offering was put. And the rest of the oil that is in the priest's hand he shall put on the head of him who is to be cleansed, to make atonement for him before the Lord. And he shall offer of the turtle doves or the pigeons, whichever he can afford, 1 for a sin offering, and the other for a burnt offering, along with the grain offering. And the priest shall make atonement before the Lord for him who is being cleansed. This is the law for him in whom is a case of leprous disease, who cannot afford the offerings for his cleansing. And I'm going to stop right there, because verse 33 onwards is about laws for cleansing houses. So next time we're going to figure out the laws if an Israelite household ended up having leprosy, or most likely fungus or something like that in their house. Here are the procedures for getting clean. And we're going to actually cover into some stuff that we might actually laws of bodily discharges, because even that was covered in the law of God. So just standing all these different things in terms of this system, which in many ways is a legal covenant between God and the Israelites, in this ancient wisdom to guide them, especially in light of the discernment of the local courts and things of that nature. So the last thing I want to mention is the last verse. I believe it's verse 32, talks about how this is what you do if you're poor. So the long and short of it is, if you're an unclean individual, the priest would have different tests to figure out if you were unclean, or if you were just balding, or if you just got burned in different situations. Leviticus 14, all the rules and rituals to actually become clean if you're diagnosed with having leprosy and actually being unclean. And the last section goes into how, like we sort of read before in Leviticus 12, if you were unwealthy, there was a system in which God foresaw that, and there would be a system to offer turtle doves or pigeons, and to utilize different things if you couldn't afford what was the standardized system and animals to sacrifice for the procedure. So in that way, we can sort of see how God is covering all the bases. And I think understanding the original context, there's ancient wisdom in that we can see how God prepares for those who are unwealthy and marginalized, just from the very fabric of the way the Torah is designed. And we can most definitely apply that principle, that spirit of the law in our towns and communities and cities today, if the Most High made provision so that people would all be taken care of, then we should too in our own governments and societies act in such a way that everyone is represented. So with that being said, y'all be blessed in God and in the Most High, and I'll see you in the next video. All right, peace and love.